Gerald Morrow had switched to Massey Ferguson in the spring of 2018. He was 63 years old at the time, and he had farmed 1,100 acres in Champaign County, Illinois since 1985, 33 years on the same ground with John Deere equipment. The switch had not been emotional. Gerald was not the kind of man who made equipment decisions based on loyalty or identity or the color of the paint. He made decisions based on evidence, and the evidence had accumulated over 3 years of documented frustration with John Deere's precision agriculture platform that had finally reached the point where the cost of staying exceeded the cost of changing. The specific failure had been in the integration between his John Deere Operations Center and the variable rate application system he had invested $47,000 in upgrading in 2015. The integration had never worked correctly. He had documented the failures meticulously in a log he had kept since the first problem appeared in the spring of 2016. Software updates that broke functions that had previously worked. Connectivity failures between the cab and the cloud that resulted in lost prescription data. A firmware update in the fall of 2017 that had corrupted 2 seasons of yield mapping data that Gerald had used as the basis for his variable rate fertilizer prescriptions. He had spent $47,000 on a precision agriculture system, and 3 years of documented failures had rendered it functionally unreliable. He had raised the issue with his John Deere dealer, a man named Rick Alderman at Alderman Equipment in Champaign, multiple times over those 3 years. He had received software patches and technician visits and apologies and explanations about server-side issues and assurances that the next update would resolve the remaining problems. The next update never resolved the remaining problems. In January 2018, Gerald had made a list of the yield data he had lost, and the prescription accuracy he had compromised, and the input costs he had incurred as a result of operating on degraded variable rate data, and the number had come to approximately $38,000 over 3 seasons. He had presented this calculation to Rick Alderman and asked what John Deere was going to do about it. Rick had said he would pass the information to his John Deere territory manager. The territory manager had called Gerald once and said the issues Gerald had experienced were known and being addressed in upcoming releases. Gerald had said upcoming releases had been the answer for 3 years, and he wanted to know what John Deere was going to do about the losses he had already sustained. The territory manager had said the warranty covered hardware failures, and the software issues Gerald had experienced were not classified as hardware failures. Gerald had thanked him and hung up and called the Massey Ferguson dealer in Urbana the following morning. The Massey Ferguson dealer in Urbana was a man named Paul Vickers, who had been in business for 17 years. Gerald had been in Paul's dealership twice before, once out of curiosity, and once to look at a specific implement Paul had in inventory that was not available from Alderman. They had a nodding acquaintance. Gerald called Paul and said he wanted to talk about switching his entire fleet. Paul said he was available whenever Gerald wanted to come in. Gerald came in 2 days later and spent 4 hours at the dealership. He asked Paul about the precision agriculture integration specifically. He asked about the Fuse Technologies platform that Massey Ferguson used. He asked about data storage and backup protocols. He asked about the history of major software failures affecting yield data. Paul answered everything directly, and where he did not know the answer, he said so and found it. He did not oversell. He acknowledged that every precision agriculture platform had issues, and that Gerald should talk to MF operators in the region before making a decision. Gerald did exactly that. He talked to 7 Massey Ferguson operators over the following 6 weeks. He asked each of them specifically about the precision agriculture platform. The responses were not uniformly positive. 2 of the 7 had experienced integration issues with specific third-party software, but none of them had experienced anything comparable to Gerald's 3-year experience with the John Deere Operations Center. Gerald traded his John Deere fleet in April 2018, 5 tractors and 2 combines. He bought Massey Ferguson replacements through Paul Vickers' dealership. He drove the first Massey Ferguson off the lot and home to his farm and spent 2 weeks learning the new systems before committing them to field work. He found the Fuse Technologies platform to be what the John Deere system had failed to be: reliable in its basic data capture and storage functions. It was not perfect. No system was perfect, but it did what it was supposed to do consistently, which was the baseline Gerald had been unable to achieve with the system he had replaced. He ran Massey Ferguson for 5 years. He was satisfied with the decision in the way a man is satisfied with a decision that has been validated by outcomes. The yield data system worked. The variable rate prescriptions were accurate. His input efficiency improved measurably over the first 2 seasons as the prescription data quality improved. He told other farmers about his experience when they asked. He did not proselytize. He answered questions honestly when they were asked. He had made the right decision for his operation, and he knew it, and he did not need other people to confirm it. His son David was 38 years old. He had grown up on the farm and had come back to it after 5 years working in agricultural finance in Chicago. He was capable and hardworking, and he had good instincts for the operational side of the farm, even though his training had been primarily financial. He had been working alongside Gerald full-time since 2019, handling more of the day-to-day operational decisions, as Gerald had moved toward a more strategic role. Gerald trusted David's judgment on most things. On equipment, David's judgment was influenced by factors that Gerald considered peripheral to the decision-making criteria that mattered. David had grown up on John Deere. His friends in the county ran John Deere. The farm he admired most in Champaign County, operated by a man named Harrington who farmed 4,000 acres and who was widely considered the most professionally managed operation in the area, ran John Deere exclusively. David respected Harrington enormously, and he had told Gerald more than once that Harrington's approach to equipment, standardized fleet, single dealer relationship, simplified parts inventory, was worth considering. Gerald said Harrington's approach was correct for Harrington's scale and situation, and did not speak to their situation. David said he thought the principles applied regardless of scale. Gerald said he respected David's view. They did not argue about it. They were both professional enough to accept that they disagreed and move forward. The health event happened in February 2023. Gerald was 68 years old. He had been monitoring a cardiac arrhythmia for 2 years, managed with medication and quarterly checkups, and had been told by his cardiologist that his activity level needed to decrease. He had been reducing his physical involvement in the farm operation gradually over 18 months, shifting more of the equipment operation to David, and hired help, taking a more advisory role in the daily decisions. The February event was more serious. He woke at 3 in the morning with symptoms that his wife recognized immediately from the cardiologist's instructions and called 911 without waking Gerald fully. He was in the hospital for a week. The diagnosis was a significant arrhythmia event that had caused brief cardiac compromise. The cardiologist said Gerald's farming activity needed to be minimal for at least 6 months and limited permanently. He could advise, he could observe, he could be present on the farm in a supervisory capacity. He could not operate heavy equipment. He could not do physical labor. The farm's operational management was David's now completely. Gerald came home from the hospital and told David what the doctor had said. David said he understood and that Gerald should focus on recovery and not worry about the farm. Gerald said he was not worried about the farm. He said he trusted David. He meant it. Gerald spent the spring of 2023 recovering at home. He sat on the porch in the afternoons and watched the fields from a distance. He reviewed the farm's financial statements that David brought him each week. He answered David's questions when David called with decisions that needed Gerald's input on historical context or financial parameters. He did not visit the machine shed. He was not supposed to be on his feet for extended periods, and the walk to the machine shed required more exertion than his doctor had approved for the first month. He talked to David by phone every morning and evening. The conversations were about the farm. The planting was going well. The equipment was running. The hired men were managing the field work. David was managing everything. Gerald felt the particular mixed quality of a man who has handed over something he built and trusts the person he handed it to, while also knowing that trust does not eliminate the gap between his judgment and someone else's. The first trade happened in May. David called Gerald on a Tuesday evening and said the 2021 Massey Ferguson 8S.305 was showing some transmission behavior he was monitoring, and the trade value on it was strong right now, and he had an opportunity to trade it for a 2022 John Deere 8R310 at a favorable differential. Gerald asked what transmission behavior. David said it was not a fault condition, just a characteristic he had noticed under heavy load that he was not fully comfortable with. Gerald asked if Paul Vickers' service department had looked at it. David said he had not brought it in yet. Gerald said before trading a machine that was performing operationally, he should have it looked at by the dealer. David said the trade timing was the issue. The differential was available now and might not be in 2 weeks. Gerald said 2 weeks to get a machine inspected before trading. It was not an unreasonable delay. David said he understood. He said he would think about it. He called back 2 days later and said he had made the trade. He said the differential had been closing and he had decided to act. He said the John Deere was a good machine and it was going to improve the fleet's serviceability through Alderman equipment, which was closer than Paul Vickers' dealership. Gerald said all right. He noted that David had said he would think about it and had then acted without the inspection he had agreed to consider. He noted it and said nothing about it. The second trade happened in July. David called and said the 2020 Massey Ferguson 7S210 was a machine he had always found less intuitive to operate than comparable John Deere models, and there was a good 2021 John Deere 7R.290 available at Alderman that would fit the operation well. Gerald asked about the Massey Ferguson's condition. David said it was fine mechanically. Gerald asked why they were trading a mechanically sound machine for operator preference reasons. David said it was not just preference. He said the John Deere integrated better with the precision agriculture platform he was planning to standardize on. Gerald asked what platform. David said he had been researching the John Deere Operations Center updates, and the current generation was substantially improved from what Gerald had used in 2015 to 2017. Gerald said he was aware the platform had been updated. He said the reason he had switched in 2018 was documented failures over 3 years, and he was interested in what evidence David had that the current platform was sufficiently reliable to justify building a fleet around it. David said the evidence was Harrington's operation, which had been running the current John Deere platform for 2 years without the issues Gerald had experienced. Gerald said Harrington's operation was 4,000 acres with a dedicated IT support contract for the precision agriculture systems and a full-time technology manager, and comparing that infrastructure to their 1,100-acre operation was not an apples comparison. David said he understood, but he still believed the current platform was reliable enough. Gerald said he wanted to see the platform reliability data before the trade was finalized. David said he would put it together. 3 days later, David called and said the trade had been completed. He said the data had confirmed his assessment. Gerald asked to see the data. David sent a document that was a comparison of features rather than a documented reliability history. Gerald looked at the document and understood what had happened. David had used the language of data to describe a preference. The trade had already been made. Gerald said the document was helpful and thanked David for sending it. By September 2023, 2 of the 5 Massey Ferguson tractors had been traded for John Deere replacements. Gerald was walking to the machine shed by then, his mobility having improved through the summer. He went to the shed on a September morning and looked at what was there. 2 John Deere tractors, both new enough to be unfamiliar, and 3 Massey Ferguson machines he recognized. The 2 new John Deeres were good machines. Gerald had nothing against them as machines. He looked at them and thought about what their presence meant and what their presence was going to continue to mean. He called David that evening and said he would like to talk about the equipment direction. David said, of course. They sat at the kitchen table the following morning. Gerald said he had noticed the fleet was moving back toward John Deere, and he wanted to understand David's thinking. David laid it out honestly. He said he believed a standardized John Deere fleet with a single dealer relationship at Alderman was the right structure for the operation going forward. He said his reasons were operational simplicity, dealer proximity, and his own comfort with the platform. He said he recognized these were partly preference-based reasons, but he believed preference and comfort were relevant operational factors when the primary operator was going to be working with the equipment every day. Gerald listened to all of it. He said he understood David's reasoning. He said he wanted David to understand his own reasoning, which was that the switch to Massey Ferguson in 2018 had been made based on documented performance failures with John Deere's precision agriculture system, and that switching back required documented evidence that those failure modes had been resolved, not comparative feature documentation, and not a reference to a 4,000-acre operation with different infrastructure. David said he had confidence in the current platform based on his research and his conversations with other operators. Gerald said confidence was not documentation. David said he understood that was Gerald's view. Gerald said it was not a view, it was an epistemological standard. David said he understood the distinction. They finished the conversation without resolution. Gerald had said what he needed to say. David had heard it. They both knew what was going to happen next. The third trade happened in October. The fourth happened in November. Gerald was aware of both of them before they happened because David told him about each one the day before the trade was executed. The notification was a courtesy that fell short of consultation by the precise margin of 1 day. Gerald received the information, asked questions, received David's answers, and did not block the trades because he had already had the conversation about his concerns, and blocking individual transactions after that conversation would have been a different kind of interference than the conversation itself. He had made his position clear. David had heard it and had made his own decision. The farm was operationally David's. Gerald had said so. He was not going to unmake that statement one transaction at a time. By December 2023, 4 of the 5 Massey Ferguson tractors had been traded. The remaining Massey Ferguson was a 2019 6S 155 that David had not yet addressed. Gerald did not ask about it. He walked past it in the machine shed occasionally and did not comment on its presence. Paul Vickers called Gerald in November, not about the trades specifically, but to let Gerald know the dealership was there if Gerald needed anything. Paul said he had heard through the market that the Morrow farm was making some fleet changes. Gerald said it was accurate that some changes were happening. Paul said he understood. He said he valued the relationship he had had with Gerald over the past 5 years, and he wanted Gerald to know that if the situation changed in the future, the door was open. Gerald thanked him. He did not say anything about David's plans. He did not know precisely what David's timeline was for the remaining machine. He suspected the 6S 155 would be traded in the spring. He was correct. David traded it in March 2024, completing the transition. He told Gerald the morning he made the call to Alderman. Gerald said he noted it. David asked if Gerald had anything he wanted to say. Gerald said he had said what he needed to say in October, and he did not see a reason to repeat it. David said he understood. Gerald said he hoped the John Deere platform performed as David expected it to. David said he believed it would. The John Deere fleet ran through the 2024 season without significant issues. The precision agriculture platform performed adequately. There were 2 connectivity interruptions during planting that David logged, and that Alderman's technician resolved remotely within hours of being notified. David noted in his farm records that the resolution time had been good and that the platform had been reliable otherwise through the planting season. He showed Gerald the records. Gerald read them and said the resolution time was good and that 2 connectivity interruptions in a planting season was within acceptable range. He said he was pleased the platform had performed well. He meant it. He was not invested in David's decision being wrong. He was invested in the farm performing well, and the farm had performed well in 2024. Gerald was honest enough to hold those 2 things separately. His concern about the decision-making process and his genuine satisfaction with the operational outcome. In the fall of 2024, Gerald's cardiologist cleared him for limited equipment operation. Light work. Utility tractor operations. Nothing that required sustained physical exertion or extended hours in heavy field conditions. Gerald had not operated equipment since February 2023. On a Saturday morning in October, he went to the machine shed and looked at the utility tractor, a John Deere 5125R that David had bought to replace the Massey Ferguson 4S.85 that had been part of the original fleet. Gerald had not operated this machine before. He spent 45 minutes reading through the operator's manual before he started it. He drove it around the farmyard for 20 minutes, testing the controls, familiarizing himself with the behavior. Then he drove it to the machine shed and parked it. He had not done any actual work. He had just driven it. He sat in the cab for a moment after shutting it down. He thought about the Massey Ferguson 4S85 it had replaced, a machine he had used for loader work and utility tasks and which had run without a problem in 5 years on the farm. He thought about the 8S305 and the 7S210 and the other machines that had left. He thought about Paul Vickers's call in November and the words Paul had used, "The door is open if the situation changes." Gerald thought about what it would take for the situation to change and concluded that it would not change, that the decision David had made was the decision that would define the operations equipment strategy for at least the next decade, unless the John Deere platform failed in a way that could not be managed, which was possible but was not something Gerald could plan for. He climbed down from the utility tractor and went back to the house. Gerald and David had dinner together on Sunday evenings when David's family, his wife and 2 children, came to the farm for the weekly meal that had been a standing arrangement since David had moved back to Champaign County. After dinner in November 2024, when the children were in the living room and David's wife was helping Gerald's wife with the dishes, Gerald and David sat at the kitchen table with coffee. Gerald said he wanted to say something and that David should hear it as the complete statement rather than the opening of a negotiation. David said he was listening. Gerald said David had made the equipment decisions he had believed were right for the operation, and he had made them with honesty about his reasoning and without concealment of what he was doing, even when the notification had come one day before the execution. He said he had concerns about the epistemological basis of some of the decisions, and he had expressed those concerns, and David had heard them and had made his own judgment. He said that was what operational authority meant, and he had given David operational authority, and he was not going to retroactively qualify that authority by continuing to contest decisions that had already been made and implemented. He said he wanted David to know that the equipment direction was David's to manage, and Gerald's role going forward was to advise asked and observe when not asked, and to trust the person he had put in charge of the operation he had spent 33 years building. David said he appreciated that. He said he wanted Gerald to know that he had heard everything Gerald had said about the decision-making process, and he had thought about it seriously, and he believed his decisions had been correct. But he acknowledged that the process by which he had made some of them had been faster than it should have been, given Gerald's stake in the operation. He said he would be more deliberate about the process going forward. Gerald said that was all he had wanted. They finished their coffee. The children came back to the kitchen asking about dessert, and the conversation ended in the way that farm family conversations ended, absorbed into the normal texture of the evening and put away with the dishes. The farm is running. The John Deere fleet is in the machine shed. David is farming the 1,100 acres in Champaign County that Gerald built from nothing over 33 years. The precision agriculture platform has performed adequately through its first full season. Gerald is on the farm in a limited capacity, walking the fields in the mornings when the weather is suitable, reviewing the records David brings him, answering the questions David asks. Paul Vickers's dealership in Urbana is 14 miles from the Morrow farm. Gerald drives past it occasionally. He has not stopped. He does not have a reason to stop. He has Massey Ferguson equipment on the farm. He has a relationship with the dealership that was built on 5 years of transactions and professional respect. The relationship exists in a suspended state, neither active nor concluded. Paul said the door was open. Gerald has not walked through it. He may not walk through it. The farm is David's to run, and David runs it with John Deere. And that is the fact of the situation as it stands. Gerald thinks about what might have been different. He thinks about the conversation he and David had in October 2023, where he had said what needed to be said, and David had heard it, and they had both known what was going to happen next. He thinks about whether there was a version of that conversation that would have produced a different outcome. He does not think there was. He thinks David had decided before the first trade what the fleet was going to look like, and the subsequent trades were the implementation of a decision that had already been made. Gerald had recognized this and had said his piece, and had allowed the implementation to proceed, because the alternative was a conflict over equipment brand that would have damaged the relationship with his son and the succession of the farm he had built. And those two things were worth more than the color of the machines in the shed. He has no doubt about that. Some things are worth fighting for, and some things are worth letting go. And Gerald Morrow has been farming long enough to know the difference, even when the thing being let go is something he was right about.